If all you know about the dietary guidelines for Americans is that it used to be represented by a pyramid and then became a plate and now it's back to a pyramid?
Sort of. Then today, you're going to learn something. We're sitting down with a UVM dietitian to learn about the newly released guidelines and get some expert advice on making healthy food choices. Hello, Vermont. Okay. If there is consensus opinion among doctors and dietitians, policymakers, and everyday Americans, it might be that as a country, we're confused about what to eat. We stress about food choices and their implications on our bodies, our communities, and even our society. Eating, an act that can bring so much comfort and pleasure, instead feels fraught, and social media contributes to both misinformation and mistrust. To be honest, it's hard to know if today's conversation will help that situation, but I'm really hopeful because we're going to stay in the lane of evidence-based nutritional science. My guest today is Dr. Farryl Bertmann, a registered dietitian nutritionist who is a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and a clinical associate professor of dietetics and nutrition at UVM. When I was in the NFS department at UVM, I was very pleased to call her a colleague, and I'm super glad to have her with me today. But I'm not going to call you by your first name. I'm going to be very formal. I'm going to call you Dr. Bertmann. So Dr. Bertmann, thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and this is a big topic. This has been a lot in the news. People may be under some confusion because, again, graphics have been changing. There's a lot about beef tallow. I mean, we're hearing a lot, and so I'm very glad that you today can come and just help us separate fact from fiction, rhetoric, etc. We're just going to talk about the facts.
Sounds good.
Okay,
I'm
so
excited.
Let's talk about what the dietary nutrition guidelines for Americans even are. What are they for? Yeah. Why do we use them? Why do we have them?
Yeah, so it's a tool that the government uses, both the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services, and they use this to help inform programs like school lunch and WIC and SNAP. And these guidelines come out every 5 years. Okay. Between the 5 years that they're released, there's a lot of work in the background.
Yeah. Okay, so every 5 years. So the fact that new dietary guidelines just came out, that was always part of the plan.
It was part of the plan.
Yeah.
They were scheduled to come out in like the fall or winter of 2025. But January 2026 is pretty close.
Okay. And is there a regular process for how the guidelines are constituted?
Yeah, and that happened with these guidelines as well. So right after the new guidelines are released, scientists start looking through the literature and asking scientific questions. And then an advisory board, a committee is formed for these guidelines. It was about 20 individuals that were physicians and dietitians, and they come together and they look through that scientific evidence and they create a document. In the case of these dietary guidelines, it was around 400 pages. Okay. Those are then presented to the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services, and then they came up with about a 6-page set of dietary guidelines based off of that 400-page document that was developed.
And then these are important because, like you said, not only are these intended to provide some guidance to everyday Americans in making food choices, but it also is the document that guides decision-making about important programs that are delivering nutrition, that are delivering food services on behalf of the federal government.
Absolutely.
And state programs.
And it's really important for us as Vermonters. So it's going to help us with our school lunch. It also informs the Older Americans Act. So thinking about our older Vermonters, it's going to help with that work as well. It helps with our military and our veterans, as well as some of our correctional institutions.
Is this an American phenomenon, or do other countries also do guidelines?
About 100 other countries do dietary guidelines. They're not identical. They look at what is the agriculture within the country. They're looking at what are the cultural cuisines that are within the country, and so they tailor it based on the needs of each individual country.
Yeah, which I find a little fascinating because we do think of these as being terra firma, right? But at the same time, but they do, because our eating habits are personally or personal, they're culturally informed, all of
Exactly.
these things. Well, and how about the average American diet? Do most American diets conform to what's in the dietary guidelines?
I think most dietitians wish that we would conform more closely to the dietary guidelines, regardless of what year of that release, and we don't. A couple of areas as a dietitian that I'm concerned about: fiber intake. The average American consumes about 16 grams of fiber. People who are...
Is that good or bad?
It's below. It's below what you should be doing.
Okay. All right.
So if you are female, you should be getting at least 25 grams of fiber a day. If you are male, you should be getting at least 34 grams of fiber a day, and that's gender at birth.
Okay, so we should be eating, let's say, quote unquote, more healthfully than most average Americans are.
Correct.
Okay, where else are we falling short? Fruits, vegetables?
Yeah, so we certainly should be eating more fruits and vegetables. There is a tendency, and actually these new dietary guidelines start to directly address this. Americans typically eat more highly processed foods, more foods with added sugar. Personally, I'm concerned about alcohol intake, and so actually the new dietary guidelines don't quite align with what I would like them to say, but happy to talk about that more if you'd like to.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the guidelines too, because Americans may also be familiar with, there's a graphic, right, that is associated with it. We talked about it a little bit in the introduction, and the graphic has also changed. How did the graphic come into use? Is that just is it to help us interpret them? Okay.
So, and I think it could potentially be something around accessibility as well.
Yeah.
So for people that want to
this
look
is
at the
this is from
graphic.
about the 1990s, right? So this used to be the way we depicted
1992,
it.
I believe, around then it came out.
And so food pyramid, and we have fruits and, like we have carbohydrates on the bottom, fats and things at the top. And the idea being eat more
of the larger part of the pyramid.
Okay, so that's also what's our mental model for how to be able to read this.
Yes.
And then we move to My Plate.
Yeah, we had a My Pyramid in the meantime, wasn't beloved, but we moved into My Plate.
Okay. Yep, so then this was the idea that you should be thinking about quadrants on your plate and having larger portions. You can see lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of grains, smaller amount of protein.
Right.
Vermont, we love a little dairy over there on the side, right? Okay.
Half your plate.
Half your plate,
yeah.
right? Okay. And so, and this I know some people had trouble with because they're like, every meal, I have to do this at every meal. So, and then we've moved into, this is the new guideline pyramid, and this one has been confusing for some folks. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, happy to. So as you can see, they have flipped that 1990s pyramid, and what it's implying is that we should be eating more protein, and they're suggesting here animal-based protein.
Okay.
You can see that up at the top.
Yeah.
And you should be eating more fruits and vegetables. You can see that up at the other top. And fewer grains, which is quite an inversion of what we were used to back in the 90s.
Well, yeah, I mean, that definitely, from the idea that that the pyramid has lots of carbohydrates, grains, bread products, cereals on the bottom, and now how does that interact with what you were talking about fiber, for example?
Yeah.
Because now this is all now the rubber meets the road, and we're talking about how to average people interpret this and what should we do. So
so this is where it gets interesting, because we have this model, but then we look at the dietary guidelines, and there's some things that don't quite line up. So in the dietary guidelines, they are encouraging Americans to eat 10% of their calories as saturated fat or less. If you're looking at this inverted guideline and you're seeing, cheese and steak and butter, yes, eating those whole foods can be helpful, but just make sure that you're not exceeding that 10% of the saturated fat. So that might be a little bit confusing. As somebody who is promoting fiber, certainly, because that can be helpful with cardiovascular disease, making sure that we're reducing our cancer risk, keeping our colons healthy. I would like to see it move right, where we're eating more of those fruits and vegetables. And if that is not something accessible for you, then whole grains, just to make sure you're getting that dietary fiber.
Okay, so those are, and then protein.
Yes.
And actually, hang on, I'm going to double back again because you said something important. There's the graphic and then there's the document.
Exactly.
And so essentially, maybe we should not get too hung up on the graphic and interpreting it too literally.
Yes.
And instead be thinking about what is in the document itself, because the advice has not changed that dramatically.
Some of the advice has not changed.
Okay.
Some of the advice has changed dramatically.
Okay.
And I think we were heading there, right, with the protein.
Right.
Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
protein. So in the previous version of the dietary guidelines, they recommended 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. And now it's gone up by 50 to 100%. So it's at 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram.
So what's that reflect? What do you think?
Yeah, so for people who like to do math, where I would want to start is, how can you even calculate that? So
this is very true. I do not know how many kilos I weigh at all.
So you can take your weight, divide by 2.2, and then that will give you a sense, then multiply it by, say, let's start at the lower end, 1.2, and then you get those grams.
So we did a whole show on protein a few months back. And the question was, are we getting enough protein? And it sounded like the answer was most Americans are doing just fine.
If we are looking at albumin, most Americans are doing quite well. Older Americans would benefit from more protein. And if we are going to align with the new guidelines, what I would suggest is incorporate protein in your breakfast. But the protein alone is not going to help with the fat-free mass. You also want to be doing strength training to help support that intake of the protein if you want to build muscle mass.
Because that's what the idea of having more protein for, is because we need more protein in order to be able to build the muscle mass. Muscle mass is going to be better for us as older
Absolutely.
adults.
Helps with metabolism, helps with strength, helps with bone health.
Okay. So as a dietitian, I'm going to give you your last question. Best advice for people to make health-promoting food choices?
Yeah. So if possible, eat at home, make food at home, lower the highly processed foods. If you're going to be consuming more protein, check and make sure that there's not a lot of added sugar in that protein. Watch out for your saturated fat. And if there's anything you remember from this conversation, if you're looking at that inverted triangle, veer right. Head towards the fruits and vegetables.
Head towards the fruits and vegetables. Okay, good. That's a super, super final point for you to leave us on. Thank you so much, Dr.
You're very
Bertmann.
welcome.
Loved
Thanks,
having you
Amy.
here. As always, Vermont, thank you for learning and exploring with me today, and thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.